Now, as the name of the video implies, this is part 12 of a story, so if you haven't seen the first several parts yet or just aren't caught up, I'd highly recommend checking them out first, or this likely won't make any sense to you. Links to all previous parts will be in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start by getting a close-up shot of the face of Vader, and as we slowly pull back from it, we see that he is not wearing Jedi robes as we've grown used to seeing him in, but rather he's wearing sky blue robes, and we also see that he stands upon a narrow walkway seemingly made of light or energy, and one that is surrounded entirely by a dark speckled sky field. And we quickly realize he is in the world between worlds, and that he stares through one of its countless portals at a lush green world. That's when another figure, a tall and beautiful golden-haired woman who also wears sky blue robes, comes up from behind him and says, "It is time, Vader. Our work here is finished. The others are gone now. It's only you and I left." But to that, Vader shakes his head faintly, and with his eyes still affixed on that green world beyond the portal, he says, "I do not understand what our purpose here was. To watch and record, but never to experience life for ourselves. To never feel the Force flow through us as they do." The golden-haired woman gives a small, understanding smile, and she says as her eyes too drift to the green world beyond the portal, "I too feel a sense of regret, as we all did, that we could never live as they have. But it was never meant for us. Our place was here, to record all that we had seen so that these worlds, these people and events, would never be forgotten. So that maybe a long time from now, in a galaxy far, far away, their stories can be known to others. This is what we were meant to do." Hearing that causes Vader to sigh, turn his gaze away from the green world beyond the portal, and give something like a relenting nod of the head. The woman behind him is about to walk away, it seems, when Vader, his eyes once again going to the world beyond the portal, says, "Can you imagine what it must have been like, though, to feel the Force?" The woman shakes her head to that and says, "You forget that they do not feel the Force, Vader, not in the same way that you or I might. Instead, the most astute amongst them are only aware of a balance all around them, one that, thankfully, they cannot manipulate, or would no doubt lead to constant conflict amongst them, an imbalance within the Force itself, as they used it for their own selfish gains." Once more Vader sighs, and that is when the tall, beautiful, golden-haired woman, a look of concern now on her face, says, "To set foot on one of their worlds for even a moment and let the Force flow through one it was never meant to, risks shattering the balance. You know this all too well, Vader, and if that balance is broken, the Force will attempt to correct itself by any means necessary. It is even likely the instability within the Force will soon allow those select few who can vaguely feel it the ability to now manipulate it, leading to the very constant conflict I spoke of only moments ago." But after hearing all that, Vader suddenly steadfastly shakes his head and says, "No, I must experience it, just once before I let myself fade away. Just one moment, that's all, and I'll come right back, I promise." He then takes one step towards the portal, when she says, "Your selfishness will lead only to darkness, Vader." But to that, he turns his head, looks at her and smiles as he says, "It will be but one fleeting moment," before he quickly takes a step forward and walks through the portal. And as soon as he's through it, the lush green world that was once beyond it instantly turns into darkness. And that's when she lowers her head and says, "Your one fleeting moment will now lead to endless conflict and suffering, my friend." And after a few moments of nothing but utter despair upon her face, she then lifts her head, and suddenly there is a spark of hope in her brilliant blue eyes, and she says, "But I will do all I can to right your selfishness, and see to it that the Force is balanced once more." She then walks forward until she stands directly in front of the portal, and lifts her hand and reaches out towards it. And that's when we watch as seemingly thousands upon thousands, or maybe even millions of different images, of different times and places, zip by her in a matter of seconds. And after observing for some time, the images stop flashing by, and now, beyond the portal, we see a woman in what appears to be some type of dingy cell. And that woman looks very similar to a young Shmi Skywalker. The beautiful, golden-haired woman then extends her hand forward, until just the tip of one of her fingers seems to cross the threshold of the portal. And when it does, her eyes go wide with amazement and awe, as for the first time, she experiences the Force. For a moment then, it seems like she's tempted to walk through the portal, but then she resolutely shakes her head and says softly to herself, "Your selfishness gave shape and purpose to the darkness that was always there, Varad. My selflessness will now do the same for the light. And the woman before me will give birth to a chosen one day, who will have a chance to balance the force, though it will be the union of one of his descendants, a vessel of the darkness itself, and one that I will choose to be a vessel of the light that can perhaps put everything back as it should be." The golden-haired woman then pulls her hand back, and the images begin to flash by in the portal once more, until they suddenly stop and we see what appears to be the dreary gray corridor of some type of Imperial complex, where we see a man and woman dressed in Imperial science officer uniforms walking and talking to each other. But there is something in the way they look at each other that betrays that they are more than just mere fellow officers. The golden-haired woman then again reaches but the tip of her finger across the threshold for a moment, before then pulling her hand back once again. And again, millions of images or times and places begin to flash by her. She then looks down at her finger, the one she has been crossing the threshold with, and we see that it gives off a golden glow. Her eyes remain focused on it until, yet again, the images flashing by stop and settle on one in particular. And beyond the portal now we see the plains of Lothal, and resting in the tall grass, not far from the threshold of the portal, we see a pack of Lothwolves. The woman then seems to think for a moment, nods to herself approvingly, and reaches her finger once more across the portal threshold and says, "You shall be the guardians, and when the time comes, you must find one worthy of walking the paths of this place once more." And with that, she pulls her finger back through the portal, and we see the golden glow is now gone. She then sighs, lowers her head, and says that she has done all that she can, and now can only hope those who can stop Varad will be brought together. And with those words, she slowly begins to fade away, and that's when there is a flash, and we now find ourselves within the Sith Temple on Malachor, where Rey and Ben Solo are still embracing, while Luke Skywalker looks on with an expression upon his face that can only be described as hopeful concern. Luke then slowly makes his way towards them, and when he's close to Rey and Ben, they pull back from each other, and Ben gives Luke a rather awkward bow and seems to be about to say something akin to an apology for some reason. But Luke says first, "I'm sorry, Ben. As you likely now know, I have kept some truths from you." Ben, looking only slightly hurt or upset, then says, "You have, but I'm sure you had your reasons." Ben seems about to say more, but Luke looks at the saber in Ben's hand and says, "Where's Ahsoka?" Ben looks down at the saber and then says, "She saved us on Jakku," but Luke then shuts his eyes tight, and he hangs his head slightly before only saying, "Vader." Ben nods to that and says back, "I can't be certain that she's gone, but it was almost like I could just feel it." Luke says nothing to that, and instead says, "He has taken so many people I care about from me. One of the reasons I kept the truth from you and your mother was so that he wouldn't find out about either of you and take you also." Ben then says, "One of the reasons was another because of what my future holds. Is what she told me true?" Ben then looks down at the two halves of the ancient Sith and says, "Am I destined for darkness? Is that really why you wouldn't tell me? Why you wouldn't train me?" Luke looks Ben right in the eyes and says, "Yes, it was. I have been to a place where I have seen many possible futures, and in all of them you have become a servant of the darkness, with a power beyond that of even Vader. And in some of them I saw myself trying to destroy you, and that was a fate for both of us I could not accept. I could not accept that I would try to kill my own nephew. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I tried to keep it all from you, so that you could avoid your destiny." To all that, Ben shakes his head vehemently and says, "But I don't feel the darkness within me. I came here to save you, to become a Jedi." Luke gives a soft sigh and says, "And yet, I can still feel it within you, Ben. It's still there. The darkness is still there. Though..." Luke lets his voice drift away, and Ben says, "Though what?" Luke now looks at Rey and says, "Though never before have I seen you two together before you fall to the dark side. You usually find each other after." That's when Rey, who looks utterly confused by all of this, speaks up and says, "What do you mean, seen us together before?" Luke gives her a smile and says, "Hello, Rey." Rey smiles back and says, "You know my name. Luke Skywalker knows my name." Luke again smiles and says, "In every future I saw, you two always find each other. Every time you do, however, it's after you fall into the dark side, Ben, and Rey tries to save you. Ben and Rey look at each other, and Luke goes on. Every time, though, she fails to turn you away from the darkness, and she's either eventually forced to destroy you, or you her. Ben and Rey, who are still looking at each other, seem like they're about to apologize to one another when Luke steps in, lays a hand on both of their shoulders, and says, "Relax, you two. Perhaps events are playing out in a way where neither one of those two endings will have to come to pass." Ben and Rey then reach out and take each other's hands and smile at each other, which causes Luke to faintly smile before he turns from them and allows them to have a moment. But soon enough, Luke is saying, "One way or another, we have to get out of here, and soon. Time works differently in this place. It's slower in here than it is out there." Luke glances down at the ancient Sith and says, "That's part of the reason why she was able to survive in here for so long." Finally, Luke says, "Also, there is someone I need to find." That's when Ben speaks up and says, "Erba." At first, Luke seems confused to hear that name, but then looks as if he's hit by a wave of emotional pain as he says, "Erba. That sounds like a name Mara would have chosen. But the question is, how did you know it?" Ben quickly responds, "I've met her. She's an apprentice of Vader." Ben then shakes his head, his eyes filled with blame as he says, "How did you let that happen?" Luke gives something like a helpless shrug and says, "I never knew. I never felt her until just recently, until I stopped focusing on the darkness and remembered to look to the light. Something Mara tried to tell me so many years ago, before I ran off to find and destroy Vader. But instead I found Snoke." Luke then shakes his head regretfully and says, "If only I'd listened. If only I understood what you were trying to tell me, Mara. We might all be together right now." Ben seems to think for a moment, then says, "This place you were in, where you saw all these possible futures, how is it you didn't see her there?" The question causes Luke to think for a long moment before saying, "I'm not sure what it means, but I can only guess the dark side did all it could to hide Erba from me, and what part she might have to play in all this, I simply do not know." We then quickly switch scenes and get a shot of the Senate building on Coruscant before we're taken inside into the office of Senator Leia Organa, who stands at a window looking out upon the endless city. That's when we see standing behind her is Han Solo, and he says, "Still no word from Luke, huh?" Leia shakes her head and says, "He hasn't been the same since he lost Mara. However that happened, considering he refused to ever talk about it." Han doesn't seem to know what to say to that, so instead says, "Do you think he'll send the Jedi to help us here?" Leia shrugs. "Our reconnaissance ships say the Imperial fleet at Jakku is massive. If it decides to attack here, at the heart of the New Republic, there'll be nothing we can do to stop them. Mon Mothma's decision to reduce the size of our fleet, and our constant skirmishes with Gregor the Hutt's forces in an effort to tame the Outer Rim, has left us nearly defenseless." Han frowns and then says, "What about the Mandalorians?" Leia returns the frown and says, "Sabine's doing all she can to convince them to fight beside us, but even if they do, we'll still be greatly outnumbered." Han shrugs and then says, "If that's the case, what good is a handful of half-trained Jedi going to do us?" Leia turns from the window, glares at Han for a moment before then saying, "You seem to forget how much good Luke did us, and he was only one practically untrained Jedi." Han looks like he's about to apologize, but Leia does it first, and then she says, "I just don't know why Luke is so reluctant to work with the New Republic." Han replies, "History's not really my thing, as you know, but last time the Jedi worked with the Republic, it didn't end so well for, well, anyone but Palpatine." Leia frowns, but before she can say any more, Han moves forward and wraps her up in his arms. That's when the two hear a lightsaber ignite, and both turn around to see a young red-haired woman wielding a crimson-red bladed lightsaber standing in the doorway of the office. Leia immediately then says, I recognize you from the security footage. You're the one who abducted my son." Erba shakes her head and then says, "Your son came willingly, and last I saw him, he was doing fine." Leia then says, "You've made a mistake coming back here. My guards will be here in a moment, and..." But Erba cuts her off and says, "Guards? Is that any way to treat family? Besides, they've all been incapacitated." Leia then says, "What exactly is it you want, then?" Erba responds, "I'm here to speak with my father." Very slowly then, Leia turns her head to glare up at Han, who, after a moment, realizes what she's implying with the look. Han then raises his hands and says, "Kid's crazy. I've been as faithful to you as a mated bantha is." Leia rolls her eyes and grumbles something about why he can't be more romantic, when then she again focuses on Erba and says, And who exactly is your father, and what makes you think he'd be here? To that, Erba simply says, because my father is your brother. My father is Luke Skywalker. We then switch scenes and get a shot of the massive Imperial fleet around the planet Jakku, before we're taken on board Darth Vader's Super Star Destroyer and into his vast, dark personal chamber, where much to our surprise, we see standing at attention before Vader is Grand Admiral Versio, who looks ever so slightly nervous to be in there, though she also looks ever so slightly agitated to see, standing beside Vader, is Varad, who she only knows as someone who showed up not long ago in a Jedi shuttle and was allowed to go before Vader. We then hear Grand Admiral Versio say, "The fleet is prepared, my lord. We only await you to give the order, and we will make the jump to Coruscant and begin the attack. An attack the feeble forces of the New Republic will be no match for." Vader gives an approving nod of the head and says, "Very good, Grand Admiral. The order is given. Take us to hyperspace, and let this be your finest hour. An hour your father would have been proud of." Versio nods and then says, "Thank you, my lord, but something tells me there's another reason you've called me before you." Vader then says, "You are correct, Grand Admiral. Once the attack on Coruscant is concluded and we are victorious, I will be relinquishing my position as Emperor and naming Snoke my successor." At this point, Varad, or Snoke, takes a step forward and simply smiles at Versio, who does anything but return the smile, and instead, while glaring at Snoke, she says, "I will of course heed your last command when given, my lord, but I cannot speak for the rest of your empire. We have all served you and you alone so loyally, believing you could and would restore us to our rightful place as overseers of this part of the galaxy. But him we do not know, and many will have no reason to follow." Upon hearing that, Snoke moves forward and says, "I shall gladly give any who would challenge my authority a reason to yield to me if required. And while Vader has led you to victory over this part of the galaxy, I shall lead us to victory over the entire galaxy." Versio stares blankly at him, clearly unimpressed, before simply saying, "As I said, when Vader gives his last command, I shall follow you. Until then, you are nothing to me." Snoke then looks to Vader and says, "You were right about this one. Her loyalty is impressive." He then turns, looks at Versio, and finishes, "When the time comes, I shall do all I can to earn your loyalty, not because Vader has commanded it of you, but because you will see and appreciate that I can bring an order to this galaxy unlike has ever been seen before. And as such, you will realize I was meant to rule it." Once again, Versio just stares blankly at Snoke for a moment before Vader commands her to leave them, and she does. Once gone, Snoke says to Vader, "Will she truly honor your last command and serve me?" Vader gives a nod of the head. "She will, but there will no doubt be others who will not." Snoke gives a careless flutter of the hand and says, "Those I shall deal with when the time comes, but as long as she remains loyal, the command structure will remain intact, and that will make my succession an easier one." Snoke then begins pacing about the room, talking and plotting quietly to himself. This goes on for a few moments before he stops, looks at Vader and says, "What is it? I feel you are unease, my new friend." Vader replies, "You have promised me the ability to go back and change a great many things. In exchange, I will give you my empire. But I still do not understand how changing the past will not impact this future you seek to rule, or why, if you truly have the power to enter the world between worlds, you need my assistance at all." Snoke seems rather irritated by the questions, then says, "The dark side now favors you, Vader, but it is a favor that will soon die with you. Luke Skywalker, however, is very clever. For a human being, of course. If anyone could find a way to permanently destroy me before I eventually regain the full favor and power of the dark side, it would be him. So this is why you will end the threat of Skywalker for me forever. And once done, once this new republic, as you call it, also falls, the power of the dark side will be near absolute, and we shall use the strength of it to force open a pathway to the world between worlds, where you can go back and have your vengeance upon a young Kenobi and save your precious Padme." Vader immediately then says, "But doing as such will change this future. Why would you want that or care about taking command of my empire if it'll likely no longer even exist?" To that, Snoke gives a wicked grin and says, The world between worlds is such a tricky place. When I stepped through a portal to this world for the first time, oh so long ago, I found myself trapped, unable to get back to it. The work of another of my kind, no doubt. But since that moment, since I entered reality, nothing is permanent anymore. Things can be changed as frequently and in whatever way as the master of the world between worlds desires, as long as they know how to wield that power, which was a gift my kind had but never exploited. Instead, we just recorded what we saw, so that none of it would ever be forgotten. Now, though, now it can unfold in one of an infinite number of ways. And I will always be the master of it. I will always be the one who shapes it. Vader then rises to his feet and now glares at Snoke, who only glares right back at him before saying, "Fear not, Vader. I'm not altering our deal in any way. I'm simply fully explaining it to you. Once I send you back and you change the past, I will allow events to unfold for maybe thousands of years. I'll even record them if that makes you feel any better. But then I'll simply walk through another portal, through one that leads back to this reality, where I will rule the galaxy for thousands of years, until I grow tired of this one, and create another reality to enjoy." Still, all Vader does is glare at Snoke, who then says, "Come now, Vader, does it really matter if I change what once was? Your younger self will have his life with Padme. You'll have your vengeance on Obi-Wan. Though, eventually, I'll change all that. But not until long after anything and everyone you care about will be long gone. I promise you that." Vader then finally says, "This power, this world between worlds, is something that no one should have absolute control of." Snoke looks a bit confused and concerned, then says, "Interesting words coming from a Sith. Besides, your old master Sidious knew all about it and sought it, but was thwarted by a child named Ezra Bridger, a child who went on to rule the world between worlds for a time, but didn't have the first clue about how to truly utilize it, or possess the power to control it. And he was mortal, and time has caught up with him, I'm afraid." Snoke gives a bit of a shrug and then finishes, "The same will not be true for me." Vader then says, "None of this is what I agreed to. When I go back and reshape the past, it will endure forever. That is the deal." Snoke sighs and, only looking mildly disappointed, says, "So be it, I guess. I'll just wait until you die, till the power of the dark side becomes all mine again. Then I'll eventually find my way back into the world between worlds somehow." At this point, Snoke begins to glare at Vader with anger in his eyes. He then goes on to say, "And when I do find my way back, when I become the master of the Force, the master of all things, I will make sure that your precious Padme never exists again in any reality I forge, and that you, Anakin Skywalker, will always die alone as a slave on some meaningless world. That, Vader, is my promise to you. Unless you'd like to change your mind. Unless you'd like to accept my deal." Vader is quiet for a very long moment before finally saying, "I shall accept your deal." That's when Snoke replies, "Good. Now, you shall end the threat of Skywalker, and together we will wipe the New Republic from this galaxy." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.